Good afternoon, everyone. Please rise as we begin our meeting this afternoon. Welcome to the Cade Museum and our Rotary Club of Gainesville meeting for this Tuesday, September 27th, 2022. I'm Tom Collette, your Sergeant at Arms. Our guests and visiting Rotarians watching virtually on Zoom, please identify yourself in chat. And if you're watching this after the fact on YouTube, you can register your participation. Send an email to info@rotarygainesville.org. Just like Arnold Schwarzenegger, he's back, everybody. To start our meeting today with song and pledge, please welcome Pete Enwall.
It's good to be back. It's good to be with you back. It's good to be back with you. As George Burns would say, at my age, it's good to be anywhere. Okay. Many of you, when you find out that I'm not a very good electrician, you are shocked. And it's good to be back. We're going to sing God Bless America. There he is. Ready? God bless America. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans wide with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. Please join me in pledging allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Pete. Now please remain standing for our invocation offered today by Lori Vidal.
Well, it is kind of a serious day. I do have a funeral to perform this afternoon, but also everybody's, I think, anxious right now. And so as we pray today, let's focus on two things: preparation. I know that a lot of people are busy right now, and protection. So with that in mind, let's pray together. Heavenly Father, we know that you are a sovereign God, and a God who in your providence does just like we do. Oftentimes we are filled with anxiety and chaos in our personal lives. And we know that sometimes you allow this to happen in nature for us to experience something like that we're facing these next few days. And so as we come before you, we thank you for all the blessings that you have given us in so many ways. Just even being in this room with all the creativity and joy that comes from beauty made out of things that were not so beautiful in the past. And we see so many blessings around us. And as we pray, we ask for preparation. We're just not sure what we're going to get. And so we pray for wisdom to know how to make decisions in preparation. And more than anything, we pray for protection. Watch over our families and friends, and give us the ability, as is possible, for us to reach out and to minister, to impact our community in positive ways. When that is possible, protect our families and our properties, and allow us to reach out to those who are in need. And we commit all these things to you expectantly as we pray in your name. Amen.
Thank you, Lori. You may be seated unless you're visiting us, either a visiting Rotarian or a guest of one of our Rotarians here in the club. Jason Shank has the wireless microphone. He's back too.
Thank you, Jason. Well, today it's my honor to introduce a number of guests in the room. I don't know if you're aware, there's been workshops going on recently to get community input. And so many of the people in this room were at some of those workshops, and we will hear more about that from our speaker today. But first, I would like to introduce Stanley Richardson. Stanley is the Alachua County Poet Laureate, and he also is the director of Art Speaks in the community. So Stanley, welcome. And I want to mention real quickly, his wife, Carol Richardson, has done such a great job at the Aquin Jones Museum. I heard an interview with her this weekend. I think Jean did as well. And she's great. Dynamite, man. Congratulations. All right. I don't think I see Sarit, the city architect. I don't believe he's here. And I don't see Eric. Do you see Eric? Is Eric there? Eric Bredfeld. Okay. Anyway, they're with the city, but they're part of the conversation that's going on with this initiative. Let's see. We have Kim Tanzer. Kim Tanzer is former dean of the University of Virginia School of Architecture, and prior to her tenure at UVA, she was with the University of Florida in the architecture department for 22 years. Welcome, Kim. And y'all can have a seat as I introduce you. Please have a seat. Well, and with Kim today is Miss Jean Chalmers, who probably doesn't need an introduction here. She's a former mayor of Gainesville. She's currently a realtor with the Thomas Group. You get that right? And she is also what I consider a community renaissance woman. And please have a seat. Welcome, Jean. Chris Philly. Chris Philly is someone I met just recently. He lives in the Porters neighborhood. He is a local contractor and has been part of the Thriving Cities conversation. So welcome, Chris. Barzella Papa, director of the Community Foundation of North Central Florida and part of the Thriving Cities team. And also from the Community Foundation's Leslie Bannis, director of programs at the foundation, and who is a friend of mine who had taught me much through their board academy workshops. So thank you. And we also have from the Community Foundation, Kristen Young, who is affiliated with the Community Foundation. I think she's a newer member of the team. So thank you, Kristen. And let's see, I want to say, I have someone on Zoom. I'm going to intercede with that real quickly. John James should be back on the Zoom meeting as well. From last week, he attended. I introduced him, so I'm just going to say he's a returning guest and has been instrumental in the Sweetwater Greenway project that we're going to be talking about today. So welcome to John on Zoom. So I want to introduce Richard Miles and Phoebe Miles. They are the co-founders of the Cade Museum. Welcome. And I will say we got a lot of good feedback about your talk last week. So that was wonderful. Let's see. I think I'm down to Ron Cunningham. Is that it? Well, Ron he's what I consider the Sweetwater Greenway Loop champion, former editor of the Gainesville Sun, freelance writer, and local raconteur. If I said that right. All right, that's my guess.
Fellow Rotarians, I have one guest to introduce today, but a very important one. So this is Harley O'Neill. She is with Spaciously Fed, and she is one of the local project managers for the Thriving Cities project. So please welcome Harley.
Thank you, Jay. Fellow Rotarians, it's my pleasure to introduce you to James Miller. James is the executive director of Mirror Image Leadership Academy and has also been participating with the Thriving Cities.
Fellow Rotarians, it's my pleasure to introduce my loving wife, Karen Thomas, who is also a member of the Thursday Club and works at UF.
Welcome to all. We move on our meeting. Please welcome now to the podium your president, Greg Young.
All right, thank you, Tom. Wow, that came fast. I was kind of thinking I was going to sit for a bit. Let me get to my notes then. I just want to welcome everyone today and glad to see you here at the CADE. Also, I want to welcome those on Zoom. And please, if you're on Zoom and you want to participate in the questioning, please type those into the chat section as we go along in the meeting. I'd like to acknowledge some Rotarians who have been members for a long time and have membership anniversaries coming up the 1st of October. Richard Allen, Buddy Irby, and Tony Barr. If you're in the room, please stand. Richard, I know you're here, so stand up, please. Thank you. Anyway, all three of them will have an anniversary date, October 1st of 19 years in the club. So give them a round of applause. Also, some exciting news. We have a new baby in the family here. Courtney and TJ Pache had a baby boy named Grant Michael Pache on Saturday. So congratulations to them. Well, I'm going to make this brief. I must say I'm really excited about today's presentation. No spoiler alert needed, as I just want to say I am really inspired by what you will hear today and what I heard yesterday. At this time, Phoebe, I'll let you finish chewing. You're going to be coming up and presenting today's speaker. Well, yeah, come on up.
So if you remember, if you were here last week, I gave a small little tip in the toe of the Thriving Cities Lab initiative that I am thrilled to have the director here, Ty Buckman. Ty serves as the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at the Advanced Studies and Culture at the University of Virginia. It's a mouthful, but he also there leads the Gainesville Thriving Project for the Institute's Thriving Cities Lab, which you will hear much more about. Before joining the foundation, he was an English professor for 18 years, and I think that's why I love working with him so much, because he thinks in stories. And his specialty is Renaissance epic stories. And I said, well, we have an epic story for you here in Gainesville that you can help us interpret. So it's been very fun working with him on that. His scholarship focuses on the intersection of institutional power, nation building, and the epic tradition. So this is really the perfect town for him. He lives in Staunton, Virginia with his wife, Jody Rambo, and they have a daughter who is going to be graduating this year and a son who's a junior in high school. So this is Ty's third visit to Gainesville, but it's also the first time in his life that he rode an electric scooter all around town along the Greenway Loop yesterday, and it was quite fun. So without further ado, I welcome Ty Buckman to the stage.
Thank you, Phoebe. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. And before I start, could I have the first slide, or do I do that myself? Oh, there it is. Just get to speak and it happens. That's a great thing. Before I start, as I was thinking about the opportunity to speak with you today, and I guess I'm looking, we end right at 1 o'clock, right? So I will speed through because I'm really looking forward to the chance to answer questions and talk with you about the project. But thinking about arriving in Gainesville again this time and the amazing people that I've met as part of the project. And a lot of these people are in the room, some of them aren't. But I was thinking about John DeCarmine, the icon of patience, who was at dinner last night, and I recognized his truck in the parking lot because he has a bumper sticker that says, in just very direct terms, everyone deserves a home. I thought that's really John. That's really his work in the world. Everyone deserves a home. Miss Vivian Filer, chair of the board of the Cotton Club Museum, who last night asked everyone at dinner, have you been to the museum recently? It wasn't just good enough if you've been, but you had to be there recently. And she's a great bearer of stories about the community. Your own Greg Young, who is a force for good and who could encourage his way through a granite wall. So Greg could smile and he just right through the wall. And it's been a pleasure to get to know him and his passion for the project here. James Miller, who I met on this visit and who was introduced to, just a minute ago, director of the Mirror Image Academy, but also he'd been a chaplain at Haven Hospice. And we talked just briefly last night. My sister-in-law teaches at Boston University and leads a chaplaincy program there. And the chaplaincy calling is an amazing work. And to be present with people, particularly in a hospice setting, to be present with people and their families at the end of their lives. And as a young person, to have had that experience, as we talked about it, it was wonderful preparation for the work he does now, going to middle schools every week with that kind of ministry of presence, to be there and to be patient and to listen to people and to meet them where they are. And so really excited to have you as part of the conversation as well. Harley O'Neill has been introduced, dancer and advocate for the arts and the healing power of the arts, and also really a community organizer. She kind of has that in her spirit, and she was in one of our first focus groups on phase 1 of the project and sort of lit up the table and already started forming connections with people in the arts community and beyond from that first moment. Met yesterday Turbado Marabu, who's a muralist. Not the same thing, I'll say. Not ruling it out, but just it's not the same thing. A muralist and folklorist and a purveyor of a generous wisdom. So we had, after the session ended with the Pleasant Street group, we had a long talk with him, and he was able to share with us really a deep reflection on the community and what lies ahead and what has been lost. Cornelia Holbrook, who is here, I saw her, and the joy she finds in her gardens and sharing that with others has always made an impression. Ron Cunningham was at my table with the kind of old school Hard Knocks journalism, right? A little bit of Jimmy Breslin, kind of with Ernest Hemingway, who's, you know, a Floridian, I guess. Sarit Sela, who was welcomed but isn't here. Your city architect, who knows the streets. In our meeting, she was in a number of our meetings yesterday, and as people ask questions, she could identify very quickly exactly where they were talking about and what was on the corner and the mailbox around the corner as well. And she brings that kind of can-do spirit to her conversations and a positive idea, a positive energy for the best ideas. I brought with me my colleague and good friend, Scott Roulier, who's a political science professor and author of the book, Shaping American Democracy, Landscapes and Urban Design. Scott has been a fellow traveler. We've been to Mexico City together. He just got back from a Fulbright fellowship in Gujarat, India. And he's always looking for new visions for the built environment and how sort of big ideas and transcendent meaning can find expression in physical structures. Kim Tanzer, who is a wonderful local resource. She maintains her own archive, and that's not a metaphor. It's actually an archive that she has. And she's a kind of architectural dynamo and an advocate for good design, and maintains a public presence in these things as well. And Chris Philly, who we just met yesterday. Chris is in the back there in a t-shirt. Sorry, felt a little guilty about that, so I just want to call that out for you. Chris is a contractor and philosopher, and he had a wonderful comment, a really incisive comment at dinner last night about the importance of listening. And when you're coming in, working in neighborhoods, and this is something that Scott and I have talked about, you know, we fly into Gainesville for a couple of days. We don't really know the community. This is not our home. And so we try to come in with a kind of humility at the beginning. And what Chris said about listening really set a great tone for the evening, because especially when you're talking about places with deep historic roots in some communities and neighborhoods that have suffered. You know, there's a history of, you know, in Gainesville, that a lot of hard things have happened here and in you know, neighboring communities, and to be mindful of that as we approach the work. And as we get excited about what's possible for the future, I think it's important also to make sure we're listening and aware of everyone's history and to be open to that. And so with that, now I'm gonna have to go through the deck even faster, but I think it's really about empowering the community And at Thriving Cities, we do this work. I have a slide later that says we're not an algorithm. This is human level work. This is people working with people, and that's the best part. So, human ecology, capacity building, and a civic parable unfolding in Georgia. So what I'll do in the next about 15 minutes or 14 minutes, we'll talk a little about the Thriving Cities Lab. I guess I can see it in the back. The Human Ecology Framework, 6 endowments, the summary of phase 1 that ended in June. We'll outline a little bit about phase 2, which you've heard something about, and then I'll end with a slide on an interesting community in Georgia. So the Thriving Cities Lab, as Phoebe mentioned, we're based at the University of Virginia. Our intellectual property, the guiding document that we use, the framework is the Human Ecology Framework. You have it on your tables. There it is. It looks like, did I bring one up here? I can wave it at you. It looks like this. This is a short version to try to fit on 2 sides of a page. The Human Ecology Framework is expressed through these 6 endowments, 3 classical. Some of you actually were in multiple sessions yesterday, so you've heard this 4 times, so there'll be a quiz at the end. The first 3 are classical endowments, the true, the good, the beautiful. The second 3 we think of as more modern endowments, the just and well-ordered, the prosperous, and the sustainable. And so we use these categories to consider how well a community is thriving, both on its own terms, but also in some ways to reorganize institutions within a community and pair them up in ways that maybe are unfamiliar to them. So the example of the true, those are educational institutions, but also any institution involved in knowledge production, sort of human development. So it could be research, it could be libraries, not just sort of pre-K through graduate school, and so on through the other endowments. These are an expression of what we call at the Institute critical humanism. The Institute was founded by Professor James Davison Hunter, a sociology professor at UVA, who wrote a book in 1991 called Culture Wars: The Struggle to Define America. And in the book, he argued that the way we normally understand how American society in particular is divided up is not adequate to the actual experience and the kind of deep structures of culture that are under the surface. And so in that book, he looked at some interesting alignments and realignments that sort of defied the normal political categories. It was novel and not well received at the time. And then about, I don't know, 12 or 15 years later, the American Sociological Society gave him its like highest honor and said, "We apologize that you were actually there first. We thought it was really all about, this kind of Marxist, who has the means of production." And it turned out that culture mattered a lot more than any of us thought. And that was 10 years ago. Now, every time you turn on the news, there's a, banner that says Culture Wars, colon, and then whatever the issue is after that. So it's humanistic in the broad sense of, I lost my deck. Did I do that? I did that, didn't I? Oh, you put it back. Thank you. In the sense of relating to the whole human person, these endowments are interrelated, a full expression of what it means to be thriving. And as I mentioned before, it's non-algorithmic in the sense that we don't just run the data through and then spit out a report. The final point on Professor Hunter's approach is that cultures change when institutions and their leaders embrace change. So he's a sociologist, which means he doesn't really, at the end of the day, it's not so much about what individuals think or do. If you're talking about the culture as a whole, it's really about how are the institutions interacting and who's guiding them. And so the way this finds expression in the Thriving Cities work is when we did our leadership and stakeholder survey in the spring, we identified 150 leaders in Gainesville across the whole city, public, private, nonprofit. It might be on the next slide. Yeah, it's there. And we gave them a long survey and we compiled those results. And we don't do grassroots level work. We work at the institutional level, and that reflects this theory of change. And so phase 1 of the project ran from December of last year through June. We assembled a project team that had data science people, also kind of community engagement people, some sort of theorists and advisors as well as we put it together. There were 7 of us who worked on it. There was a great meeting we had in Stanton, the town where I live in. We have an innovation hub there. They have a whiteboard room with whiteboard on 4 walls. We spent a full day. It probably looked random to the people walking by, talking about Gainesville, Florida, from sort of dawn until dusk. And we filled up all the walls. We'd gotten the survey back, and that survey, as some of you heard me say, the survey was astounding. The results were so much more insightful than we were expecting. And so at that point, we shifted our work and said, we are going to let the voices of Gainesville sort of speak out of the phase 1 report. And so the phase 1 report is available. It's a PDF. It's our document designer is going to finish up. I think she was trying to have it ready for this meeting, but didn't get it done. But it has been distributed, and we can share a copy with you. And it includes data analysis as well as the interviews. So phase 1 findings, and the report is 100 pages long. About 65 or something of those pages are really, that's the appendix with graphs and summaries of research and so on. The findings are really in the first 30 pages, and I've given you 3 bullets from that. As I mentioned, a high level of local knowledge of the challenges. So from the survey, leaders in Gainesville had a really clear sense of both the potential that Gainesville has as a community, but also a clear sense that there are obstacles. Not always sure what the obstacles were, but there seemed to be something that was impeding the collaboration. There was a desire to collaborate, but it wasn't clear how that would happen. And we also discovered, and I've mentioned this to a number of people because some people in the room have done this research. There was more, we should have anticipated this, in fairness. There was a lot more recent research and analysis on community level data in Gainesville. It's almost as though you had a flagship university in your town, right? Just wait for that to sink in, 1001, 1002. So of course you had the Bieber report. You have, world-class researchers at the University of Florida. A number of them have, turned their telescopes from the skies down to Gainesville. And so you have, a wealth of local data reporting. And so rather than redo that, our data team shifted to really kind of sorting through some of that analysis. And we picked through and chose metrics that lined up with the endowment categories. Also a finding, there's not really a way to put this in a positive term. There's a low confidence in civic institutions. And so I took one graph out of the report. This is what they call a box and whiskers graph. And in this survey, for this question, we asked Gainesville leaders to assess the degree to which in each of these endowment categories, Gainesville was thriving. So how well is Gainesville doing in the realm of the true, the realm of the good, which is social services agencies and philanthropic work, the beautiful, and these are all defined on the sheet on the table, the prosperous, and then that blue one way down there in the basement, that's the just and well ordered. So that is your civic institutions, that's local government, county government, the judicial system, all of those are in that category. And then the final one is the sustainable. But that was a striking finding. And hopefully, I mean, we've been in conversations with city officials as part of the interviews, but also in the days since, and hopefully that's gonna bounce up. So the phase 1 report, as I mentioned, it became the basis for our proposed phase 2. And we looked for, I guess the first part of it is one that we haven't talked about as much in this visit, developing a rubric to apply the framework to propose projects. So Scott and I were talking about this last night. We're looking for a way and actually we had conversations with city officials about this as well, to encourage collaboration at the project design stage, so that you create an incentive for people who want their project to go forward to reach out to others and to not only communicate, but where possible to collaborate as the project is taking shape. Because often once it's been approved and or funded and or enters into its implementation, it's much more difficult. And actually it's not, I mean, it feels like bad faith if you're invited to the table after the decisions have been made. And so we're thinking of this application of a rubric that works from the endowments that could be a kind of a way you could score proposals, that if I know, for example, that my nonprofit is applying for funding, that my proposal is going to be scored according to this measure that will reward me for making sure that I'm working with other nonprofits, or I'm sharing out my ideas. And it doesn't just have to be nonprofits, but that we're working more widely with the community at the beginning. So that's a separate project to encourage collaboration, communication. The other one, and the one that was the focus of this visit, is to choose a project to bring the community together and allow for endowment groups to build their sort of bond and flourish. So we were looking for a community level project that seemed at the right stage of its development to have this kind of thriving cities impact. And that hopefully that would build capacity and confidence for phase 2. And so the project, and this is no big reveal, was the Sweetwater Branch Greenway Loop. And as I've mentioned in our meetings yesterday with various neighborhood groups, the Sweetwater project came up in the surveys and in the interviews. People were already aware of it in the spring, and it has some local champions, and people had been discussing it. And it has the beauty of not actually having been funded, which is great, because once you get funding, you don't have to work with people anymore. You don't have to invite people to the table. You already have the funds. You just do what you're thinking. In fact, once you have funding, you actually don't want to bring people to the table because it slows you down. And so the beauty of this project is it's speculative. And you can't really see it in the graphic there, but the deck is available and it's circulated, and we're happy to share it. The Greenway Loop is, it connects 7 historic neighborhoods in the center of Gainesville, and it builds on resources that are already set aside. Most of the property is owned by the city or another government entity, and it's linking together things that are already there. And it also provides the opportunity to revitalize the neighborhoods if it's done well. And that's the way we would want it to be done, to do it well. So here, each of the 7 neighborhoods along the proposed route organizes and hosts a festival reflecting their unique heritage. So how do you take basically a public works project, which is a greenway, you can think of it as a bike path or some other kind of recreational path. How do you make that more than just a project? So I live in Stanton, Virginia. Up the road in Waynesboro, Virginia, they just did a greenway along the river that goes through. And I was jogging on it a week ago. And it's a beautiful, actually. There are people fly fishing. It's one of the rivers that the Trout Unlimited people stock, and it's a great setting. But as far as I know, the project just happened. It got funded, and I go to Waynesboro regularly. I never saw a sign about it. I read the paper. I didn't see that people had come together, that they had organized anything. It was a government project. It was a worthy thing, and they did that. And all of that is good. There is another way that you can bring people in, and the community. One of the concerns already was it looks underused because the community doesn't even know it's there yet. So people were driving by and looking and trying to figure out down by the riverbank, what is that thing? What are those people walking in the water? Like, no, that's your new greenway. That now eventually, of course, people will figure it out and they'll catch up and it'll be used. But from a kind of community development, community engagement standpoint, it was a missed opportunity. And so the idea of the festival, this series of festivals, is to energize the neighborhoods and have them contribute their vision for what the greenway could mean for them, and for them to not only express their sort of neighborhood identity and their history, but also their contribution to the Greenway project. And the other beauty about this kind of thing is it's not one thing. So it doesn't have to be the exact same iteration of a greenway in every single neighborhood. There are different ways. You could have historical markers. The greenway could look like a boardwalk. It could have a fence. It could be open, all of those things. The daylighting of the waterway is just the beginning, and it can be heterogeneous. It can be different in every neighborhood. That's probably not exactly what we would want. I just saw Kim, like, you don't want it to be so different that it doesn't look like it's one thing, but there are ways to get around that. So we're helping to plan this, hopefully for President's Day weekend in next February. It says on the slide. And Harley O'Neill is going to help us organize this. This is neighborhood work. This is on the ground. This is, and to get some of these meetings together, Phoebe tracked people down door to door, which for those of you who know Phoebe, that's a normal thing. You don't answer her email, she will find you. If you try to hide out at work, she will come to your place of work and buy lunch and then find you there. And so we'll say more details to follow. So I want to end the formal part of my presentation, have a couple minutes for questions with Commerce, Georgia. I call this a parable because I read about this in the New York Times. Maybe some of you saw this a couple of weeks ago. No, actually, maybe a month ago. Commerce, Georgia, a town of 7,000 people, about an hour and 15 minutes outside of Atlanta. SK Battery from South Korea decided that they were going to build a lithium battery plant in the US. And they chose, and obviously there are lots of tax credits, and the governor got involved, and all of the infrastructure you would imagine to locate it. And they decided they were going to drop this on Commerce, Georgia, population 7,000. So I put those numbers at the bottom. I called it a parable. It's actually kind of more of a riddle. So 13, that's for the 13 football fields. That's the size of the plant, 13 football fields. 430,000, that is the number of lithium batteries for electric vehicles that they will produce in a single year once it's up and going. Since 2010, the entire number of electric vehicles in the whole US, right, 12 years, is 2.4 million. So this one plant will produce 20% of the total of all the electric vehicles, and that's a single year. And it's a mostly Ford actually is their partner. 2.6, that's $2.6 billion, which is the project cost. 3,000 is the number of jobs that they will have created by the end of this calendar year, 3,000 new jobs. 25 to 64, that is the demographic that's growing in that part of Georgia, defying the rest of the state's demographics because they're doing so much hiring that if you look at Georgia, it's like, and then goes way up there because people are plowing in. 515, 725, 18. Does anyone have a idea what that might be? I heard it. That's right. So 515 is the Georgia minimum wage, which is so low they can't even use that because they have to use 725, which is the federal minimum wage. So 725, $18 an hour is what the average starting wage is for employees at SK Battery. And so people are piling in. 4.7% is the population growth in the county, the annual population growth as a result of the project. So why is this a parable? So as I read about this in the New York Times, I thought, I wish that the Thriving Cities Lab could be part of these meetings in Commerce, Georgia, because if you don't think holistically, if you don't start at the time when things are being built, when projects are being done, so there are quotes, I mean, look it up. They're saying we can't build schools fast enough, right? There's no city services. It's like you can't find real estate. The property, property values are going up. They can't build things fast enough. They're trying to, right? But you think, okay, most of us will spend our lives living in a world that was built for us by other people who came before us. That's sort of how it works. So what's happening in Commerce, Georgia right now, because of this windfall, like this great, the prosperous in our endowment scheme, the prosperous has just gone through the roof. But if you're not thinking about the arts, if you're not thinking about the beautiful, the true, if you're not thinking about education, you're not thinking about what's sustainable, right? What kind of community are you going to have in 10 years or 5 years? What happens if SK Battery goes out of business or decides to shift, to offshore their jobs or something like that? What's going to be left? And are the people who are making that decision, are they, those decisions right now, are they thinking holistically? Are they bringing the local resources, those people who have those concerns and talents into the conversation, or are they just going as fast as they can? And so that story is played out in all of our communities, all of the boom and bust cycle. And so the Thriving Cities Lab, this kind of human ecology framework says, let's, wherever possible, let's really take this whole view and create opportunities for the kind of the full expression of the human spirit to be included as these things are moving forward. And so we are honored to partner with Gainesville and all of the people we've met, and we're looking forward to the year ahead. So I'd love to have some questions or discussion in the 7 minutes that we have left. Thank you. Yes, Cornelia.
Hold on.
We're going to bring you the mic. Hang on a second, Cornelia.
I was curious, I'm Cornelia. I was curious to find out why we scored so high on the true and then scored sort of low. The lowest score that we had was in the just. And I don't know if you have any explanation for that disparity.
Right. So the way we interpreted that, education is something that Gainesville is proud of, and this is education writ large. So we mentioned this in the report that, and it came out in the interviews. Gainesville is immensely proud of the fact that the University of Florida is based here. And so even though there's disappointment and why doesn't the university do more for us, it is part of the local identity. And so the way we saw that was really a celebration of, or an acknowledgement of, the educational resources that are available. The just and well ordered, as I mentioned, is really a measure of how well the city government, the county government, the judicial system, all of those public institutions are performing, and it's at an ebb right now. And in our conversations, and we did interviews with city officials, and no one was surprised at that. I'll just say that, and I think there are signs of hope in that regard. Thank you for the question.
The weather is changing. The climate is changing.
Right.
And I have seen projections that one of the last places in 100 years that is still going to be habitable is North Florida, because we get the rain coming in from both coasts. And what are the projections for Gainesville's population, say in 20 years, 50 years? And how does that factor into this salutary effort that you guys are doing?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. In our interviews, we heard that there are really staggering projections of population growth in Gainesville and Alachua County, that there are thousands and thousands of more people coming. And how the city responds to that and how the county prepares for that is a question. You already have an affordable housing problem / crisis, depending on how you look at it. And it's getting worse before it's getting better. That's a separate issue. The environmental issue, I think thinking in the culture wars context, one of the lessons of the last 10 years has been having the science, being very clear about what the outcomes are from a scientific perspective is not actually enough to move the dial. And so we're not seeing the kind of rational response you would expect based on what the projections are. So building a community that has strong trust, that has strong bonds, hopefully that one of the dividends would be that we could see progress in some of those areas and get past some of the political divisions. Some of you have heard me talk about the endowments, the 6 endowments. They get us past some of the familiar political divides. As you've heard me say, some of you, it's hard to be against the good. You want to, you can put a sign in your front yard and says we're against the good. but you're probably not going to win your neighbors over. I mean, it advances the conversation beyond some of the familiar divisions, and that gives us some new ground to start on. And so I think progress on climate priorities would be in that category as well. Thank you for the question.
Hi, two questions. In the phase 1 report, I tuned in on the just and the comments about that, and it's reflective of the graph. So 2-part question. One, how is that related at all or a reflection of the national feeling toward political institutions? And secondly, feedback from the community to political institutions, local government. I believe you mentioned feedback a few times, when to give it, how to receive it. And I believe that was in the report as well. A rubric about feedback, both on how to give and how to receive, or a model. I guess it's in the question, but that would be very important, because I don't think citizens know how to bring their problems when there's a community meeting,
Right.
nor sometimes do we know how to listen to them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And the advantage of that kind of stark recognition that government needs to be more responsive to the community, that message is already taking hold, as far as I can tell. In our conversations, even some of the initiatives that have been moved forward look like in fairly short time they will bear fruit, that will improve. But once again, we come in from the outside. I think of the framework as a kind of trellis, right? This is, the community can kind of grow into this if there's interest and desire to see progress in these areas. But it's really up to the local community, the stakeholders, to make that happen. But we've been encouraged by even over the summer and some of the conversations, and we read the Gainesville Sun, and we try to keep track of what's happening here, and it looks like there's reason for optimism. Are we done?
Thank you, Ty. That was wonderful. I'm just so inspired by what you guys are doing in the community. I hope you can come up and ask questions after. You have a flight to get?
Yeah.
Do you have?
We'll stay.
You can stay for a
Yeah.
few minutes and tell them to hold the flight.
And hold the storm.
Hold the storm, right? That as well. Nice. Also, I failed to mention Scott Rollier. How do you say? Rollier. Thank you. Anyway, I'm glad you did. You covered for me. So I meant to introduce you, Scott. And what a great team you guys are. And I know you have others up there in Virginia. So thank you for coming down. And I think you're going to make our community. You're not making anything. You're helping us, empower us on how to move our community forward where we've been stuck. You know, people say, oh, we've got all these things to do, but we've been kind of stuck for a while. So maybe you're going to help get us out of the ditch, so to speak. So I want to thank your team of what you're doing and in our community. And I believe these visions could be transformational in our community. So remember, this is community input. It's not something that came down from Virginia. Community input. I want to emphasize that. So through all the extensive work you're doing. But on behalf of the Rotary Club of Gainesville, I would like to present you with a certificate, Ty, and I'll get one for you too, Scott. That is to signify that the Rotary Club of Gainesville will be giving a gift of funds to the Cade Museum Foundation for children that are at risk or underserved, so that they can attend the Cade Museum. And so I want to thank you so much for what you did. You're welcome. You can have a seat. Okay. Thank you, sir. Great job. So thank you everyone for attending today. I hope you can join us again next week when our speaker will be Cynthia Barnett, local author, famous author. And I see you shaking your head, Helen, you know her. She is from the U.S. College of Journalism and the environmental journalist in resident, specializing in water and climate stories. Cynthia will be sharing with us her most recent book, The Sound of the Sea, which actually was one of the best books that Science Friday on NPR picked up on this year, and they recommend it highly. Please continue to invite your friends to bring them to Rotary. We want to keep filling the room, and we want to actually help This helps us to make a bigger impact in our communities and in the world at large. So quote of the day, which I really liked it when I saw it. There is no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about. Margaret Wheatley. The lucky number for the raffle today is last three digits, 193, and we are adjourned.